make of the defensive effort and the intensity you guys played with?
I thought second half, and there were spots in the first half, but after we gave up those 3 threes on second chance opportunities, it's the only area we got beat in. Points off turnovers, we finally turned that around, 24-11. Points in the paint, 34-16. But those 3 threes start that second half, I thought was going to bury us. I really did. I thought the momentum was going to switch there. But, just like we did the first half, they had 21 points in the first 8 minutes, only scored 12 in the last 12 minutes. They came out and scored early in the half, but then we did a better job, with our activity. And Nate was in those gaps, knees bent, got a lot of deflections, steals, which turned into points, 8 steals that turned into transition points for us, which we hadn't been getting. That's why we scored 55 points. Just our activity defensively, was obviously the difference in the game.
Dana, what do you think that you got that sort of defensive performance tonight? Why now?
I wish I could tell you. I don't know. The guys had a little bounce in their step. Like I said, slow start to the game. We gave up 21 points early. I didn't think we were bouncing around at all. And then the second half, we started out slow. But, I thought Nate and Sean, and then KJ the second half, I thought our bigs did a good job. Our guards did a better job of getting through screens, because they set a lot of ball screens. And Boyd and Blackwell probably as good a tandem, in the backcourt as we have in our league. And I thought our guys did a great job of getting through those screens and guarding. So it was a good effort, and like I said, we've been getting better defensively, but our activity never been like this. And I think, they had a little success with a few breakaways with our activity. I thought, then they got a little more aggressive, and it was a physical game, so our guys could be a little aggressive and figure it out.
Like this kind of shows what you envisioned this team could have been defensively?
Oh, a lot closer, So, they had a big win on Sunday over Iowa, and I was hoping they might still think about that game a little bit. And but our activity was so good, and like I said, other than the second chance points, we beat them in every facet of the game, and they're a good basketball team. They beat Michigan on the road. I mean, they're a good basketball team. They're going to play a long time, I think, in the NCAA tournament. It was just a much better effort on our part tonight.
We came in the first half, and he seemed to spark you guys on offense. You got those 7 straight points that, all but erased their 9-point lead at that time. What can you say about his performance, what he was able to do?
He did a good job offensively in his 20 minutes. If you look at the plus minus, he and KJ, plus minus, 16 in those minutes. I thought he did a good job. But I was really impressed. Defensively, he has not done a good job of getting through screens and getting off into the ball. And I thought his defensive effort tonight was the best that he's shown. And, I don't know if it's just because of the team thing or what, but he got through more screens tonight than he has in previous games. And that's why he got 20 minutes. The offense was one thing, but the defense, I thought he did a good job. He had a couple sloppy turnovers there in the second half, but other than that, I thought he played good on both ends of the court.
What did you like about your team ball movement tonight?
Well, anytime you get 19 assists on 28 baskets, and a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio, which we just haven't had. And, Jackson's the only one on the team that has a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. The rest of our guys, struggle, making plays and making the right plays, but we just did a much better job tonight. Des, 5 assists, or Nate, 5 assists, 1 turnover. 3 steals. Dez, 5 assists, no turnovers. Those are stat lines that, we just haven't had. And the guys, were strong with the ball and made some good plays. The one where Dez drove it in the middle, 2-foot jump stop, thumped it down to Sean, and Sean got a dunk. It was really a solid basketball play.
A month ago, you were talking about Dez being a guy that needed to have to step up for you. This offense, defense would do more and get out of us what you wanted. And last 3 or 4 games feels like whether it's scoring or rebounding or assists or steals, he's making an impact. What have you just seen from him?
He has. The Penn State game, he played really good. He wasn't nearly as good against Minnesota, but 3 of the 4 games he has played better. We really thought Dev and him would give us a lot of athleticism on the wing. Dev hasn't been able to play, since the beginning of the season because of a groin. He hurt it preseason, so he's never been able to show his athleticism. And Dez is, he was out all last year. He just had a hard time adjusting to the speed of the game and the athleticism. But he is a good athlete, and he is capable of making those plays. He just did a lot better job, tonight making those plays. But again, we need, like I said, with Dev out, he's only 6'5", 6'8" athlete we have, so, we need him to make some plays.
He said he was talking to guys like, hey, I've only got a couple left here. I'd like to go out on a good note. What's your sense for just his motivation to kind of finish on a high note here and how that might have been a factor tonight?
Well, I, mentioned before the game, fellas, we only got 2 home games left, and, that started to hit Nate, a little bit. And, but like I said, without Nate fighting his 2 sprained ankles and coming back, tonight was, I thought the first night he kind of looked bouncy. He's played, but he hadn't looked bouncy. Tonight he gets, 3 steals, gets a block. I just thought his bounce was so much better tonight. His activity, knees bent, being an athlete rather than, just standing straight up and down. So, again, I don't know what his motivation is, but, he, Sean, and KJ, have kept the team together. They've done a good job of, a lot of teams fall completely off the rails, when things don't go as expected. And, credit to Nathan for fighting his tail off to get back, and Sean and KJ for just being competitors and staying in there. And, those 3 have practiced hard. They've stayed together. So, no, I think those 3 have done a good job of keeping us together.
How much pride do you take in them holding this thing together? And you're a coach who I imagine you expect yourself to go to the NCAA tournament every year and to be an at-large bid and those sorts of things. But in a year when things haven't exactly gone according to plan, Nate was in here talking about how much pride he has in the way things have turned around and the way you guys are playing with so few games left. For you, do you look at this season and go like, I need to end this on a good note, just for like even your own personal?
When you do something for 46 years, you're more worried about the guys. I've been through 46 seasons. Nate gets 4 or 5 at this level. Guys get 1 or 2 in the Big Ten. So you're more worried about them. You want to be hard on them, but you want them to have a good time. And, losing's no fun, especially when our expectations were to have a good team. So, again, yeah, I'm proud of them for not giving into it. I've told them every year when we start the season, we're going to have some adversity and we're going to be judged how we handle that adversity. And that never changes throughout their life. When it's good, everybody's good. You want to know who's going to respond when it's here, because we're all going to be there at some point in time. And basketball is just an example of that. Nate's going to be a dad. Kids are going to get sick. Career's not going to go quite the way you want. How are you going to face that adversity? and you find out a little bit about yourself when you play basketball and you fight through it. It's a little thing. It's not life and death, but it is fighting adversity. And, those guys got a lot of pride. Nate, he was all Big Ten defensive team last year, comes in the season all Big Ten, and we don't play well. That a lot of guys, and then he had an excuse. I mean, he had 2 bad ankles. He could have just said, "Coach, I can't go." He fought it. So no, I'm proud of him. Like I said, Sean and KJ, they've kept us in those games, and like I said, we're all judged on how we handle adversity, and it's a lot easier for 67, 68-year-old man than it is for a 18, 20, 22-year-old young man. And so really proud of the guys. Yeah, they've fought it good. The last couple games really good. But, with the exception, I think I told you guys, the second half against Nebraska, we gave into it. I was mad at them there. We got beat on the boards bad at Washington. The Minnesota game was, but other than that, they've tried to compete. Our defensive effort the second half against Indiana was nothing to be proud of. But they're those, but they've never really just given into it. And so I'm proud of that. In a season where you got to find some positives. We've had a lot of negatives, but you want the guys to gain something from the experience. Learning how to fight adversity, learning how to stay after it even when things aren't going your way. Those are all good qualities to learn.
There was a ESPN report that came out today that it said that the university is fully committed to you for next year and the future. And I was just curious, does a story or quote like that do anything for you or this team? And do you feel like they're fully committed to you?
Oh, I haven't talked to anybody. Never been discussed. I didn't read the article. I didn't know I was in trouble. But I don't know what to say to that. Like I said, I want to coach. So like I said, I didn't know they were trying to get rid of me. But
They had you in the I think it's been for a few years, the potential retirement.
oh yeah, they've always talked about that. Yeah, I am old, but no, I'd like to coach. But at a school like Oregon, when you're playing, in the Big Ten, you see the large student bodies, which mean they got a lot of alumni. You look at the Michigan schools, they got 60,000 students, and Penn State and all these, so, like Dan and I've talked about, we got to have everybody moving in the same direction. I think, with only 25,000 students, which, our alumni base isn't as big, our fan base isn't as big. So it's really imperative that the group that we have, the administration, everybody's moving in the same direction. So that's always important. And fortunately, we've got great support from boosters, and I got to do a better job. I didn't have the depth that we needed, and when Jackson went down, when Nate went out for a number of games, Dev goes down, Big E goes down. We didn't have the depth necessary to fight, to compete, and that's on me. It's a long season, and you gotta have the depth. And we had inexperienced people for our depth, and you can't be inexperienced and try to compete. I think this is 13 quad one games we've played. And you're not going to win quad one games with inexperienced players. And obviously we haven't. So again, that's on me. I'm not blaming anybody else. I got a great staff. Mr. Knight, the collective, everybody's been great. I didn't get it done. You know, it is what it is. And, you know, tell my players all the time they got to look in the mirror. You know, old coach got to look in the mirror too. You know, and I didn't have us in a position when the injuries hit for us to be competitive. And that's on me.